Thank you for your attention. Just a little bit more on my background. I live in the Boston area, and I did 6 startups over the course of most of those 30 years. I like to say that 4 of them were really good, and 2 of them were excellent learning experiences. And it was through that experience, I was on a leadership team of all those companies, that I started to become involved with business agility and more agile ways of working. So today in particular, what I'd like to do is share with you one of the challenges that I'm faced with quite a bit. I work as an executive advisor and a transformation coach. So I thought I would share some of the experiences I've had and a few things that might be useful to you. How many of you find that one of your bigger challenges is to engage your senior-most executives? And by that I mean SVP, EVP, CXX level people, right? Because the kind of change we're asking here is going to be resisted by middle management. We're moving their cheese, if you remember that book, right? So you need to have engagement there when you're starting to do this at scale. How many of you have run into the situation where when you walk into a senior executive's office, you walk out with the impression that they're thinking that, yes, just run down to that CVS at the corner, buy some of that agility and sprinkle it on my teams, but I don't need to make any changes, right? So we're asking people to make a huge change, and if we lead with, oh, you have to change, you're making it scary right from the beginning. So I want to share with you an approach which has worked well for me across a large number of clients of how do you actively engage the senior executives. Well, actively, what I mean is their personal time, no delegation. Now, of course, when you do that, right, they're thinking, oh, you're asking me to do stuff. I'm a very busy person. I've got a stream of people coming in my office asking, why should I invest my personal time? And in many cases, they're unsure about what it is specifically you're expecting them to do. And so part of your role as an executive advisor or a transformation coach is to provide clarity for that. So here's what I would suggest. Number one, you got to start with your homework, right? And your homework is 2 things. You have this grand vision, and we have, the strategic outcome we're moving towards for enterprise business agility. But you have to start modestly. And if you lead with, okay, we're going to change your leadership style, and we're going to do all these different things, it's starting to sound very, very scary. So the first thing that I've had some success with is by knowing who I'm trying to influence, I need to know who influences that person apart from me. What does their influence network look like? Because after they've spoken with me, they're going to go talk to their confidants and say, hey, I just had a chat with Rupert, and he's saying this sort of thing. What do you think? Right? So do your homework. Get to those people first. They will tell you, if you're targeting a specific executive, who that person listens to. Organization politics are there. They're real, and you have to learn how to leverage those. Second thing is you need to start with what that particular executive perceives as the challenge at this point in time. Right, so I'll give you an example. One of the organizations that I've worked with, one of their big challenges was, it was a large organization, many thousands of people. They had an ask of, it turns out, $130 million worth of deliverables, and they had an operating budget of $80 million. So that executive was concerned about that, right? They were trying to provide these services, and they didn't have enough budget to do it. And then secondarily, there were a bunch of other things that they felt were impeding their ability to do that, things like lack of alignment, lack of clarity in terms of who's responsible for what, a bit of a disorganized organization because there were people in duplicate roles. But learning what would resonate with that executive was extremely important, right? Because what we're looking for here is we're trying to draw this person in with something that's valuable to them. So then the next step would be, once you understand that and you're able to get a half an hour, and if you're able to get a half an hour, that's as much as you will get in that first meeting, right? So this is the equivalent of the elevator pitch for those of you that are familiar with sales situations, right? You need to come straight to the point. And so what you want to do is don't talk about enterprise business agility. Talk about what the outcome of that is, right? So we're using outcomes right from the get-go. right? And you hypothesis test right away. So here's an example, right? If I or we could show you a way to increase the output and speed of delivery in under 6 months by at least 50%. So this is drawing back to the other example, right? I've got $80 million budget. I've got to deliver what I think is like $130 million worth of work. So if I can increase my output, I would get there, right? I could also, in the process, aligning priorities, deliver every quarter, not just technology, but a meaningful and valuable business outcome. And at the same time, provide you, executive, some radical transparency so you can see where your priorities are and where you're misaligned, and you can intervene to make those changes quickly. I haven't talked about how I'm going to do it. I'm only talking about benefits. And then I test it, right? Is this valuable enough for you to invest 4 to 6 hours per month of your personal time to make this happen? And you might need to prepare yourself for the fact that they'll say, no, I got all these other things I'm worried about right now. This is not the right time. Right? So right away, we're testing to make sure that there is enough of a value proposition here for this person to say, okay, and I'm being very clear about that I want their personal time, no delegation. We'll be respectful of your time, but there are decisions which only you can make, and we need you at the table. And so we try to get to yes as quickly as possible. Yes, this is valuable enough for me. Yes, you could have this number of time. And these are the specific results that we're going to try and generate. Now, this isn't the whole enterprise business agility 7 pillars, right? We're starting modestly, and we're being very sly here, right? We're going to draw this person in, and in the process of achieving these first sets of outcomes, right, we're going to modify their behavior. You need to back it up, because most of them are also thinking, yeah, okay, great, you're telling them this story. Why should I believe you? So one of the things that's useful to have is a case study. And here's an example, and again, this is the argument that I was making in this particular client about output extending. There's another group that I've worked with. In fact, they're actually in your organization as well, right? Fairly large scale, 8 teams. And in 4 months, we increased their output by over 100%. Here are the people you can talk to, right? Here's the person that runs the business side. Here's the person who's their IT partner. Go and talk to them. Get them to tell you about their activity, because they will, right? They're going to make sure that this is actually something that they should believe can happen. And this is an important proof point. So now they come back and they say, okay, you've got my interest. What's the next step? Right? So now you've gained some permission to take it to the next step, and you start to talk about, where do we pilot this? Right? How can we do this in such a way that you gain confidence that this is actually doable without going in and boiling the ocean? Oh, and by the way, in the process, we are definitely going to run across some challenges that we will need. That's those 4 to 6 hours of your time that we needed. And these are the kinds of conversations that we have, is what can you do to create the environment in which this new way of working, which we're calling business agility, can succeed. That's your primary role. You're not doing any of the work, but you're leading that change of environment. And so usually introducing them to the various dimensions of things that we will talk about, right? Are you organized around the flow of outcomes, right? Are you dealing with cross-functional teams, or you've got silos in IT and somebody over here in operations and another team over somewhere else, right? What about your facilities, right? We're going to try to encourage collaboration. Do you have people that are spread across the world or across offices in the same city for whom it's very difficult and an unnatural act to get up and go talk to somebody else? They're sending emails and other things like that, right? How do we gain this transparency? What's the environment we need to set up in the meeting? And what's the governance process? How do we put a process in place that places an emphasis on delivery of outcomes every single quarter and surfaces impediments so that that can be a discussion so we can identify those and get rid of them? Funding models, right? Are we spending lots and lots of time stealing money, internal transfers, instead of having a pot of money and having some flexibility as long as we're achieving outcomes? How do we get there? Candidly, funding model is going to be the biggest challenge to change. You're going to have to deal with large parts of the organization, and many times I usually leave that one for later. Soft stuff like executive visible support. The reason we need your 4 to 6 hours is because your whole staff is looking to see what is your level of engagement, right? Are you walking down into the areas where those teams are and just saying, how's it going? What do you need from me, right? Are you asking the right questions at the senior level governance meetings? What are the business outcomes that we've delivered? Why did we choose this one over that one, right? Making sure there's a consistent message. And how do we reinforce the importance, your vision of where we want to go, why it's important, the progress we're making, what's the active communication plan that you have? And lastly, and the most fun one is 30% of people in your organization will say, this is great, we're on board. The other 30% will be sort of ambivalent, sort of waiting to see how this will go. And the remaining 30% will be actively working to undermine this, but you won't know that because they're not going to tell you that to your face. So how do you deal with that? So this is part of the coaching discussion, right? So when we see things coming up, that we have that conversation, we sit down with this executive and say, okay, let's see what the current issue is. Which of these dimensions of the environment is the one that we need to work on next? Right? And because these are the things they can influence. So in summary, what's worked well for me is, first of all, motivate, right? Appeal to basic human greed works really well, right? And that's what I'm doing, right? Here's the problem, you want to make it better, you'll look really good, right? That's the human greed part of it. And I'm appealing to emotions, not logic. So that's a more powerful thing that's more visceral, right? Start with the why and the business value and back it up with a proof point. And then you can show the way. Once they've said, yes, I'm interested, so how would I do this? What's the next step? Now we can start talking about this new way of working. We start to bring in elements of enterprise business agility, and we also bring in the measures of success. To some degree, we've already established the measure of success, right? If we're trying to increase output, if we're trying to increase the frequency at which we're delivering business value, we can measure that. Then we focus the discussion on the environment for change, right? How do we set this whole transformation up so it's easier for people to behave in this new way than it is not to behave in that way? Simple things like get them out of their cubicles and put them into a pod, right? Have governance meetings where the focus of the conversation is on outcomes, not the work being done. And lastly, we need to maintain the momentum, right? So this is a communications program that Lisa and Andrea talked about. This is having the leader frequently have maybe a town hall or something like that to talk about, here was my vision, great progress that we're making, here are some of the next set of challenges, right? Keep the conversation on the forefront. And as an advisor, you can help that executive by looking at those factors for the environment and thinking about every opportunity where the leader can reinforce those particular dimensions. And that's my story. Thank you.